Welcome to Small Spark Theory. This podcast is designed as a collection of thoughts, ideas, and practical tips on using marginal gains to help your agency new business endeavours. Small Spark Theory is created and hosted by me, Lucy Mann of Gunpowder Consulting. Hello and welcome back to Small Spark Theory. We had the pleasure of inviting Katherine Allison from Master the Art to the podcast. I think it was probably one of our very early episodes. It might have been episode 3. And we talked quite broadly about communication and presentation skills. Katherine is a trained actress, but also has worked extensively in agency new business. So she combines those different experiences to now provide training for people in an agency environment and beyond to help them master their presentation and communication skills. Now, I've been thinking a lot recently about the subject of listening. I know we've talked in the podcast recently about when we're trying to win new clients, rather than thinking specifically about revenue and adding revenue into the business, about being able to translate that into adding new relationships into the business. And I read a really lovely quote recently that effective listening is a skill that underpins all positive human relationships. So on that basis, I'd love to welcome back Katherine Allison.
Hello, it's brilliant to be here again.
Oh, thanks for coming. I mean, we've had a bit of a conversation about listening as a skill, and I know that's something that you build into your training when you're working with clients. But just to start us off, tell us a little bit about the courses that you do and the kind of work that you're getting involved in.
So the courses that I tend to do are based a lot around presence and gravitas. Mm-hmm. And a key component of gravitas is listening fully.
Okay.
And listening is a skill that we can all develop. We can all do better at listening. And it's interesting because we're taught to talk.
Yep.
We're taught how to write, but we're so rarely taught how to listen. And for me, it's a skill that is absolutely crucial to being a good new business person and for winning new business.
And of course, there's so many communication channels now, aren't there? I mean, we are being bombarded every day by communication channels, whether it's social media or we've got all of these messaging channels. And I'm wondering whether that's contributed to the fact that we're spending so much time broadcasting and being bombarded by this kind of just tidal wave of messages all the time, that it's really... Do you think our listening skills have got worse?
I think they have got worse. I think it's a lost art, is listening. We are constantly, as you say, on broadcast mode and being broadcasted to.
Yeah.
And what we're not doing is actively listening to other people's opinions and understanding their feelings, getting under their skin and trying to understand why they believe what they believe and why their opinion is still valid, even if it's different from your own.
Yeah, okay. All right, so let's start off then by talking specifically around new business and how we can really exercise our listening better in new business.
Well, I think as agencies, and particularly as new business people, as we've said already, our default setting tends to be broadcast mode. We feel this desperate need to tell clients and prospective clients, look at us, we're brilliant. Look at our amazing work. Look what fabulous results we got. Look at our fancy office in Shoreditch, whatever it may be. But we're constantly feeling this need to talk at prospective clients and tell them how fabulous we are at everything. But if we're permanently in broadcast mode, then that doesn't allow any time for real listening. And in a new business context, how can we then truly understand what clients really want, what their problems are, what their pain points are, what it is that's going to be of real value to them, and how our services can match their needs?
Yeah. So what I've observed, and in fact I know I've done this myself, is that in a new business scenario, whether that's on the phone or face-to-face at an initial meeting or in a pitch, that we will ask a question and then we do that thing where we might shut up, but we're not actually listening, we're just waiting to speak again.
Exactly. And I know that I am very guilty of doing that too. And I'm pretty sure that most people listening, that particular scenario will resonate with them because we're constantly thinking, oh, what am I going to say next to impress the client? We're not truly listening to the answer to the question that we've just posed. I think we've forgotten the power of silence.
Ah, okay.
And silence is so powerful when used in the right places, the power of a pause, I suppose. And it's only recently dawned on me that the word listen has the same letters in it as the word silent. Did you know that?
Amazing insight.
I can't believe I've gone through all my life not knowing this. But now that I do, I'm like, oh, yes, love it.
Brilliant.
But we listen for many reasons. So we listen to obtain information. We listen to understand. We listen for enjoyment. We listen to learn. So given all this listening that we do, you'd think that we'd be good at it. But pretty much all of us are not.
Okay.
And in fact, research has shown that we only hear 25 to 50% of anything that is spoken to us. So we only take in 25 to 50% of what someone says to us.
Right.
I think that's an incredible stat.
Yeah.
And in an agency context, that means that when you're meeting a client for the first time, you might be in a briefing meeting, it may be a tissue meeting, it may be a pitch. If we are receiving information or being briefed by a client, there's a possibility that we're only hearing 25 to 50% of what they are saying to us. And we hope that the important parts are in that 25 to 50%.
Yeah.
But what if they're not?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you're losing a pitch before you've even started.
Yeah.
So it's really important that we develop active listening skills and that we start to listen more fully to what clients are telling us and to their needs and their wants.
Okay. So how can we do that?
Good question. Well, there are 5 key active listening techniques that can help you become a more effective listener.
Brilliant.
And the first one is pay attention. So give the speaker your undivided attention. Put the focus wholly on them and acknowledge what they're saying. And recognise that non-verbal communication also speaks loudly. So look at the speaker directly, make eye contact, put aside any distracting thoughts. Don't be constantly and mentally thinking about what you're going to say next or how you're going to disagree with what they're saying. And try to avoid being distracted by things going on around you. It's so easy to stop listening because you can hear a conversation going on outside in the corridor, or you can hear your boss on the phone to a client in another room. Try not to get distracted by those things.
What about taking notes?
I think taking notes is really important.
Okay.
In a more formal pitch scenario or chemistry meeting, I think it can be helpful to allocate one person to take notes and one person to ask questions and truly listen to the answers.
Okay.
So that they can then ask another question off the back of what's just been told to them in response to the first question. Because it's only by asking questions that you get to the real nuggets, those real insights, that you get to the real brief, I suppose. So pay attention is the first technique. The second one is show that you're listening. And there are things that we can do to demonstrate that we're actively listening. So nodding is one, but not overdoing it. So nodding occasionally. Smiling shows that we're responding to what someone is saying to us. Also, other facial expressions. Often we raise our eyebrows a little bit to show that we're listening. But make sure that your posture is very open and is genuinely interested. If you're faking it, it shows.
Okay.
So what you don't want to be doing, and it's going to be hard for the listeners to, obviously they can't see this, but when you overnod and you have your raised please like me eyebrows and you're desperately trying to be liked.
It's too much.
Too much. And it comes across as inauthentic, and straight away that creates, well, it erodes trust and it erodes respect.
And presumably, if you're following that first tip, which is about attention, then that should make that second one a lot easier.
Exactly.
Good.
Absolutely. But so often we forget to do that. We're so obsessed with what we are going to say next, what we should be saying, is what we're about to say right? Is my voice going to get heard? I need to fill every single silence that we forget to put the focus onto the audience.
Okay.
And to make sure that what we are saying is going to be of true value to them.
Okay.
Constantly summarize back to the client what they have just told you. Paraphrase it. So what you just said, if I understand it correctly, is that you need X, Y, and Z.
Right.
They go, yes, exactly. Or they may say, actually, that's not quite right. What I really meant to say was... So don't be afraid to paraphrase and ask for clarification. Constantly summarize back what the client has just said to you, and you'll find that you get to real understanding of what it is that they need, what it is that they want from you as an agency.
And that they can see that you understand it as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then the fourth technique is deferred judgment.
Okay.
What I mean by that is that interrupting is a waste of time. And interrupting someone when they're speaking is a very poor listening habit. And it's something that a lot of us do, sometimes without realising, because we're so desperate to judge, to disagree, to get our point across. So defer judgment, because it's going to frustrate the speaker if you interrupt, and it limits your full understanding of what they're trying to say to you. So make sure that you allow the client to finish what they're saying to make their point. Don't interrupt with counter-arguments, because it's only going to really, really annoy them.
Okay. That's really interesting. And it's something, actually, I can be completely honest, in now coming up for 3 years of podcasting, sometimes when I listen back to some of the episodes, I've been so keen to agree with people throughout and enthusiastic in agreeing with what they're saying, that there's this weird kind of me making agreeable sounds over the top of them explaining a brilliant point. So yes, I have to keep that in check.
I have to hold back.
And instead just nod and smile.
But not too much.
Not too much. Not too much.
So the fifth technique for active listening to help you listen more effectively is to respond appropriately. And by that, I mean that listening is something that can encourage respect. And in fact, I think listening is the foundation for respect. And interestingly, if I were to ask you to write down the names of 3 people who you think are good listeners, you would most likely write down 3 names of people who you either like, who you love, or you respect. Now, if for any reason you wrote down the name of someone who you disliked, I'm 99.9% certain that even if you didn't like them, you would still respect them. So listening for me is the foundation of respect. And this 5th technique about responding appropriately is making sure that you are not attacking the client or the speaker, the person that's talking to you. You're not putting them down by getting your opinion across. It's about being candid. It's about being open. It's about being honest in your response. And it's about asserting your own opinions respectfully and being sure that they know that their opinion and what they're saying to you is as valid as your own opinion. So you need to treat that person in a way that you would expect to be treated yourself. And while this isn't necessarily that relevant in a client prospecting or pitching scenario, it does become very useful in a team building scenario when you're dealing with tricky clients or dealing with tricky colleagues or a very difficult scenario in the agency workplace. And we often forget, again, to truly listen to the people that we're working with and to allow them to get their voices heard. So, to summarize, pay attention. Make sure you're wholly focused on what the client is telling you. Show that you're listening by using the right body language, nodding appropriately. Provide feedback. Constantly summarize back to the client what they've told you. Defer judgment. Don't interrupt. It's only going to annoy them. And then respond appropriately. Be candid, be open, be honest in your response. Understand that everyone's opinion is valid.
Brilliant. Those are really good pillars, I think, for helping anybody communicate better and listen better. And I, listening to you, explaining those, I was thinking about so often when people feel undervalued, generally it's because they feel that they're not being listened to, they're not being heard. And I guess thinking about that now, it seems obvious that, in marginal gains terms, if we're looking at ways that we can, beyond what it is that we're trying to sell, because we know that clients can always buy that usually somewhere else, we're always trying to look at those other ways that we can engage with them in a more meaningful way, so that we can build a better relationship, or we can give them the idea of what it might be like to work with us before they're actually working with us. I mean, that's how we win new clients. So all of these small things are, if we can polish those skills, then that's bound to make a difference, right?
It will make a huge difference, because what we want to do as agencies, we are looking to establish ourselves as trusted advisors, and we can only really get to that point if we are truly listening to what clients are saying to us, and by getting underneath their skin and truly understanding what it is that they're thinking and feeling and what they need from us as an agency.
Brilliant. I can remember when we interviewed Tony Spong from the AAR, he gave us this incredible analogy, which I'm not actually sure made it through into the final episode because we had so many brilliant insights from Tony. But he talked about holding a pitch, if you like, for a loft conversion. And he invited 3 local builders or loft specialists to come round and quote on his loft. And 2 of them came round, measured up, gave him a quote, or said they'd send a quote. The 3rd one came along, measured up, and then said, "So who's going to be staying in the loft?" And Tony said, all right, well, okay, well, that's going to be my son when he's kind of back from university. And he said, right, okay, so a double bed then, and presumably he's got a laptop and lots of tech, so he's going to need lots of PowerPoints. Okay, and carried on with a list of questions like that. And by the time he left, Tony thought, well, that's amazing, but what on earth are the other people going to base their quotes on? Because how can they possibly know the right information? And it's just such a brilliant analogy. I've often thought of how we so often approach new business, exactly as you say, by telling people, and almost when a prospect is in buying mode, we almost feel like we don't really want to test them on anything, because we don't want to give them the opportunity at any point to say no. So we just ask as little as possible, and therefore, and even if we do ask, we're not really listening. Thinking about prospecting, one of my observations has been, particularly in early lead generation, lots of agencies that I talk to, when I ask them if they've been doing lead generation before, and they'll say, yes, but it didn't really work, or yes, but, and I'll say, where's the data? And they say, well, no, nobody was interested. And I'm conscious that there's a tendency, if we don't get the immediate answer that we're looking for, i.e., yes, we've got a specific need, or yes, we'd like to meet to hear more about you, we can be quite dismissive and forget about those contacts. But obviously not right now doesn't necessarily mean that they're never going to be a client, but we're just not really listening to that answer. We're not really paying attention.
Yeah, listening for future opportunities, I suppose.
Exactly. But what about further along the sort of sales process? How can we be more effective with our listening?
Well, further along in the sales process, it's really important that we're looking to develop a connection, whether that's through personalization, through rapport building, through development of trust. And of course, we can only really get to those things if we're truly listening to the client. And of course, that means building up a relationship. So making contact when you can, picking up the phone, which of course does have a greater chance to build up rapport, and truly listening and asking the right questions. So it's about digging deep, asking questions, a combination of open and closed questions to really get to the nuggets, to understand what that client wants and needs.
And informed questions too, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you have to have done your research. I mean, we all know this. You can't just bulldoze in there, talk solely about yourself, your agency. And yet so many agencies still do that. They're still on sell mode, broadcast mode. We're amazing. And it shouldn't be about you. It's got to be about the client. What is it? What are their pain points? And it's only by truly listening to the answers that you're going to be able to match your services to the needs of the client.
Okay.
So then, of course, when you've built up a relationship with a prospect and you finally get that initial meeting, then it's really important that you understand how to listen well in that initial meeting. My advice, and I know I mentioned this the last time we chatted on this podcast, but is get the client talking as soon as possible in that meeting. So even though it feels counterintuitive and you want to still be on broadcast mode, telling them how amazing you are, ask an intelligent question, get them talking, and even if they have spoken for most of that meeting, they will feel that you, the agency, really gets them. So listen and use that first meeting as an opportunity to really understand the client and get under their skin. Be on receive mode and then really appreciate and take the time to acknowledge your client's thoughts and their opinions, appreciate their viewpoint, and then constantly summarize back what they're saying to you so you can really get clarification. As we said before, this is a key technique for active listening, and yet we so often forget to do it. And it's only by doing this that we'll get to some real answers and some real insights from the client.
One of the things that I've observed is for those initial meetings, it's really useful not to arrive and automatically get out a laptop, because I think as soon as you get out a laptop, it feels as though you're about to then go into presentation mode, and therefore you've already got a kind of a barrier in the room. Whereas if you stop yourself getting out that laptop or iPad or whatever it is that you use to show your examples of your work, then you're more likely to force yourself to start asking them questions to get them talking.
And
so
it becomes much more of a two-way conversation, which is the point that you want to get to.
Yeah.
And that forces you to not be on solely in broadcast mode.
Yeah. And I guess then you can always, once you've listened, then you can whip out your examples of your case studies and point to those in answer
exactly
to those points.
And you're not just speaking for the sake of it. What you're saying is of real value to the client, and you know that, and you can be confident in that because you have listened to what they want and what they need.
Brilliant.
After a chemistry meeting, initial meeting, you want to move on to you may have a tissue meeting, but then you may have the final pitch.
Yeah.
And of course, listening in pitching is also really important, because if we're not listening to what's going on, both in that pitch room, but also before the pitch actually happens, when we're in the agency prepping for it, then you're in danger of losing business before you've even begun. I think it's really important to listen to other agency team members. A lot of people may feel that their ideas are not worth raising. They may feel that their opinion on a particular response to a brief is not valid. But if you can really listen to every single team member, every pitch team member, make sure they feel that their opinion is valid and worth it, then who knows, you may actually find that they have more confidence to pipe up with a really brilliant idea, which becomes the winning pitch idea. So it opens you up to new ideas purely by listening and allowing everyone to get their voice heard.
It's really interesting that you raised that point about making sure that everybody can contribute their ideas, because earlier this week I went to hear Matthew Syed talk about his new book called Rebel Ideas, and it's all about how diversity is really important when you're collaborating to create ideas, and that's never more important, I think, than the creation of creative ideas and making sure that everybody that has the potential to bring those ideas to the table can do that, even not just the ones with the loudest voices, but those that are perhaps less confident but their ideas are no less valid. So I really like that idea of really listening to make sure that people feel that they can contribute.
And of course, you're going to create a much better culture within your agency if you are training everyone to listen actively and consciously to each other. Yeah. It's going to really strengthen the culture of the agency overall, not just from a new business perspective, but in terms of people enjoying working there.
Yeah, love it. Okay.
Also, one final point on pitching is about feedback. We forget to listen to pitch feedback from clients. And it's only by getting that feedback, taking it on board, acknowledging it, truly listening to what that client has told you, whether you've won that pitch or lost it, it's only then that we can learn from mistakes and get better, refine and improve our offering.
Amazing. Okay, so what about how we can apply some of this with our existing client relationships?
Well, I think our existing clients want to feel valued in the same way that we do as individuals working as a team. As a client, you want to feel listened to and valued. But I think what's important here as well is that if you are listening to your team members internally, then you can detect more quickly any issues that may be arising between an agency team and a client. And often these little problems sort of start bubbling over, and as soon as they escalate, you're suddenly in a crisis situation where you're potentially losing a client. So by listening to our team members, allowing them to get their voices heard, we're far more likely to be able to detect problems while they're small and nip them in the bud before they escalate and become something very damaging to your business.
Yeah. It's interesting how, having done client satisfaction interviews for agencies, how more often than not, it is the small things that become irritants if they aren't addressed over time. Unfortunately, they're the things, because they are small, that are less likely to be pointed out. So we have to be looking for the clues all the time, and which is why actually having some forum where our clients can actually give us feedback and that we can listen to their changing needs or their challenges outside of the delivery of our day-to-day work for them, having a process or a forum that they can do that makes an enormous difference and can really change the course of a relationship.
Absolutely. I think everyone should be listening more to their clients and undergoing that process so that they can understand how they can do better. But also giving themselves a pat on the back when things are going well. We forget to do that lots of the time.
Indeed. So on to everybody's favourite exercise, networking. Now, I was doing a talk with Dan from Future Factory recently, and he said if anybody says that they love networking, then they're either a liar or a psychopath.
Oh, no, I love it.
Which he delivered that with his brilliant northern accent and had the entire crowd applauding. It's a fair point. So we know that networking can be difficult for most people. Listening can be a game changer. It can make that easier. Where can we start?
Again, it's about taking the focus off yourself and putting the focus onto the person that you are talking to. It's not about you. It's got to be about the other person. So again, it comes down to asking questions, but then really listening to the answer and not just sitting there thinking what you're going to ask next or how you're going to impress that person. We've all had someone in a networking scenario where they've just come up to you and shoved a business card and said, "Oh, I'm brilliant at this, and here you go, call me." And you just think, no, I'm not going to call you if it's the last thing I do. Totally the wrong approach. What we want to do is have this very genuine conversation, two-way conversation where you ask a question, you listen, that sparks something else, question comes back your way, you may say something. It feels very natural, it feels very genuine. But the main thing is to take the focus off yourself. And this comes back to a point around speaking with gravitas, networking with gravitas. Gravitas is something that is not self-serving. It's about serving a greater good. And it's important to keep that point in mind in all agency, client or networking scenarios, because so often we're in self-serving, ego self mode. And we shouldn't be. We should be thinking about what is it that we're doing that matters to us, but also to the people that we're talking to. And the other important point about networking is listening out for opportunities. And it's only by truly listening that we are going to pinpoint something or latch onto something that could be a potential opportunity. And this also works with growing existing clients as well, actually, coming back to that. We need to train our agency staff to listen out for opportunities and then to manage that in the right way, to build relationships, to convert those opportunities into business.
I think there's something around kind of networking and thinking about existing clients as well, which is, again, to your point about not being self-serving, is opportunities for other people. So I don't know about you, but I spend a lot of time connecting other people that might be useful to each other.
It's how can we help them?
Yeah.
How can we help other people achieve their own goals?
Yeah.
But it's only by listening to what those goals might be that we can connect people in the right way and serve a greater good.
Yeah, and listening out for the things that, as you say, don't necessarily serve us. So that's not an opportunity for me, but I think actually I know that if I can introduce X to Y, then they can probably help each other, and that's, as you say, for the greater good. So we should probably have a quick chat as well about marketing, our sort of agency marketing, and particularly social media. I mean, although we could say some of our other marketing activity has a danger of falling into very much broadcast, particularly if we're looking at thought leadership, we have to make sure that we've got that balance right of being able to impart our knowledge and our opinions without just being kind of broadcast only. But I think it's easy to fall into the trap on social media, particularly where we might use some of those automated platforms where we can just load up lots of content and it just is firing it out throughout the week, because we lose the opportunity to then engage more deeply with our audience and listen to some of the responses, or just actually spend the time in looking at what other people are talking about. And I think it's really important on LinkedIn too. Again, I always encourage people to be more and more active on LinkedIn and use that as a tool. But again, it's a balance, isn't it, between broadcasting and getting across your points of view and actually listening to what everybody else is saying and then being able to join in conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think we've got to force ourselves to listen more and to acknowledge and accept other people's opinions.
Yeah. And have conversations rather than just keep talking into a
have a healthy debate, but not for it to spiral into this sort of slightly nasty, very opinionated, my way or the highway social media posting that is happening so much at the moment in the political state that we're in.
Yes. So what would be your top 3 tips for more effective listening?
Okay, so tip number 1 is remember that big egos have little ears.
I love that.
How often have we all been in an all-agency meeting with a client where everyone is fighting to get their voice heard? So before you speak, do a quick check. Check in with yourself and ask yourself, is what you're about to say coming from listen to me ego? You know, a bit like the grown-up equivalent of a school child and hand up, me, ask me, I've got the answer.
Yeah.
Or is it coming from your better half? So the part of you that actually contributes in a positive way to the group, to the conversation. Now, the ego self usually has very little to offer, whereas the higher self usually has so much more of value to offer to that conversation, to that group, to that meeting. So know the difference. And then listen to the whole room, listen to the dynamics of the discussion, and really ask yourself, does what you have to say truly add something, add value? If it does, speak. If it doesn't, don't. Enjoy the silence. So
that's really powerful. Right, okay.
So that's tip number 1.
Lovely.
Tip number 2 is one that is fairly obvious, but one that a lot of us find quite difficult, and that is maintaining eye contact when you're listening, not just when you're talking. Eye contact is crucial to let someone know that you are listening to them, and it also forms a much stronger bond, develops trust and develops rapport. A lot of us find it quite uncomfortable making eye contact with people, and we tend to look over someone's shoulder, or we're sort of slightly fidgety. Try to stop yourself doing that and really make eye contact when you're listening. By doing that, you're showing interest, you're building bonds, and you're really establishing trust, which ultimately is what we're wanting to do, particularly in new business scenarios. So that's tip number 2, eye contact. And then tip number 3 is one that I love, and I have seen it work very well in practice. And this is listening combined with asking the right questions. Always wrap up a meeting with a client by asking one last question. And that last question should be, what other questions should I be asking you?
Oh, I love that.
And then at that moment, You break eye contact, you move your glance away, you glance up as if you're thinking of other questions that you should be asking. And then you're silent. You sit quietly and you wait. And then what tends to happen is that the client will come up with more insights. So they may say, well, you might actually ask how I really feel about X, Y, and Z. Or they might say, well, you might want to know why we've never done a project like this in the past. And it's only then that you're going to get to those insights that could potentially help you win that pitch and win that business. So our own questions will never uncover everything. So give the decision maker, the client, the chance to help. And always finish a meeting by asking that one last question. What other questions should I be asking you? And then sit back, be silent, and really listen to the answer.
Brilliant, brilliant tips. So I'm going to summarise because I have been listening.
Good.
First tip, ego in ears.
Ego in ears. Big egos have little ears.
Brilliant. Second tip, eye contact.
Absolutely.
And lastly, I love this one. Your last question, what other questions should I be asking you? That's
I challenge everyone to try it and notice what difference it makes.
right, I'm going to try that tomorrow.
Do.
So, Katherine, do you have a book recommendation for us?
I do, and it's not one that's necessarily directly related to business or to agencies, but I was given a book recently as a thank you for doing a talk that is part of the Do Book Company series.
Ah, brilliant.
And I think you've read some of these
Yes,
books.
yes.
And they're from a brilliant independent publishing house who are based in Shoreditch. And they have produced a whole series of pocket guides, I suppose, that are aimed at creative entrepreneurs and people that they call makers and doers, which I love. And the idea is a simple one, really. They are creating these books for people who do things and who can inspire the rest of us to go and do amazing things too. Now, it just so happens that the book that I was given was based around listening, and it's called Do, Listen, Understand What's Really Being Said, Find a New Way Forward. And while it doesn't have tips that are specific to the agency environment, there is so much within this book from which we can all learn. And I've really enjoyed reading it. And there's a whole series of these. I think you mentioned you read one around storytelling.
Yes.
There's also things around gardening and art and design. So I would recommend that everyone goes and looks at this series of books. But the one that I'm recommending today is the one around listening by Bobette Buster. What a name.
Brilliant. And obviously we will be giving away a copy of Do Listen to one of our lucky listeners. So if you join in the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag #SmallSparkTheory and tag us at Gunpowder Tweets, and we will pick a winner and send a copy. Katherine, that's been brilliant advice. Before you go, I'd just like to find out what your one piece of advice is that you'd like to leave our listeners with today.
Well, I'd actually like to leave you with a quote from Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird.
Great.
And Atticus Finch. And he said, "You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it." And for me, that summarises everything that we've talked about today.
Yeah.
And the real importance of listening and listening well.
Fantastic. As always, you've given us loads of lovely insights to think about. Thank you so much for coming back.
It's been such a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thanks.
You have been listening to Small Spark Theory, brought to you by Gunpowder Consulting. Join in the conversation on Twitter at Gunpowder Tweets using the hashtag #SmallSparkTheory. This podcast is created and hosted by me, Lucy Mann, and edited and produced by Isabel Jarvis. Music is provided by Duke Deck, available at dukedeck.com, and this episode was recorded at The Pod at White City Place. For more information and to download further episodes, head to our blog at gunpowderconsulting.com. And if you like what you hear, head to iTunes and leave us a star.